Episode 4 of the Bad Batch Season 2 has finally dropped and we need to break it down, so let's get straight into it. We begin the episode with Omega and Wrecker playing a game of Dejarik, which ends up with Omega winning. And if you recall back in episode 1, Omega is surprisingly very talented at the game, something which Sid used to her advantage. Omega tells Wrecker he owes her mantel mix, which is a snack local to Ord Mantell and a snack that both characters loved as mentioned in the previous season.
The mission's over. We can't break tradition.
Thanks, kid.
Sid tells them to get to work, but Omega points out that Hunter and Echo aren't back from their mission. Tech points out that transporting nerf nuggets isn't a real job, and nerf nuggets refers to, well, nuggets made out of nerfs, the animal commonly used as an insult in Star Wars.
Why, you stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerf herder!
Sid insists that they have to come anyway, and they all travel to Safa Toma, and we are then introduced to riot racing, which is basically an even more dangerous form of pod racing, with participants allowed to use weapons. We learn that Sid is sponsoring a racer by the name of Teo, and Tech is surprised to learn that the pilot is a droid. And the droid challenges Tech to see if he wants to race, and Tech's responds with,
"I do not have enough information about this sport to determine that at this time."
Which oddly sounds more like a droid than the actual droid himself. Teo prepares for the next race and we get to see some dumb serious pit droids, most commonly used as a repair droid in workshops and racing pits. The group is interrupted by a man by the name of Melegi, who is a Dowutin from the planet Dowut, with the species first being introduced in The Force Awakens. The two have a bit of a standoff and Melegi challenges Sid and introduces his pilot jet Venom, a Nazorian from the planet Plimto. As expected, the race goes badly, but during the race we are introduced to a few other racers, namely a reprogrammed commando droid, a reprogrammed protocol droid, and a few other Nikto pilots. And the reason for why there are so few humans in the race is that much like pod racing, the speed and intensity of the race is often too fast for human reflexes, which is why we mostly see non-humans, and the few non-humans that do compete often end up being force sensitive. The race ends up causing stray blaster fire, which ends up hitting one of the spectators. We get to see some Arbesh during the live coverage of the race, which translates to Live and Lightning Tech, which just so happens to be the name of the broadcast, but perhaps also foreshadows Tech's eventual participation and triumph in the last race. The whole race ends up being a bit of a setup as Melegi has more than one racer racing, and Teo ends up getting his speeder destroyed, losing the race. Melegi, accompanied by a Trandoshan and Gamorrean, comes to collect his debt, but Omega manages to bargain her way out of the situation by proposing a double or nothing deal. Melegi accepts and the crew begin the repairs. Wrecker points out that they could just take out Melegi instead of racing, but Tech points out that this is not a situation that calls for a military solution. And this moment can sort of be interpreted as a form of character growth for Tech, who since the last episode has begun to view the world outside the lenses of a soldier. As we highlighted in the previous episode, the old man on Sereno teaches Tech that there is so much more outside of war. And so in this case, instead of using a soldier's solution to the problem, he decides to approach it from a different perspective. All of which lends itself to the entire theme of the show of the clones determining their own fates. By choosing not to take a military solution, Tech demonstrates that even though he was a clone bred for war, he is still able to step out of his original programming and make his own decisions. So it's really a small but meaningful moment in Tech's character development. Tech also points out that this is not the first time Sid has needed help to get out of sticky situations with unsavory characters, referencing the other adventure in Season 1 in which Sid ends up in a territorial struggle with Roland Duran, the son of an infamous crime boss by the name of Isa Duran. Sid and Melegi have a conversation, and listening to it, we get the sense that Sid has a pretty dark past, one that she doesn't seem particularly proud of. Teo asks what Tech is doing, and Tech explains that he is analyzing for any patterns in the race, but Teo chides him, telling him it's all about skill and strategy. But Teo ends up getting run over by another pilot, presumably another one of Melegi's men. Malegi tries to use this opportunity to force a forfeit, but Tech then decides to be the pilot. The race begins and Tech starts to use his superior analytical skills to formulate a winning strategy. We see a few Arbesh words on Tech's console throughout the entire race, which translates to alert when the system warns him of an incomplete tunnel, and incoming when Tech was being boxed in, which immediately changes to warning when the other pilots were locked on. Tech ends up winning the tournament and the crowd cheers for his victory. And Tech's reaction to the crowd is something to take note of. By achieving this non-military related victory, it just may open up his eyes to the possibility of what he could possibly do with his life instead of constantly fighting an endless war. It is perhaps a small revelatory moment for Tech that might have huge consequences for his character's path down the line, a path that might just take him away from a life of a mercenary and one of a racer. Again, bringing it back to the idea of clones deciding their own fate. Malegi hands Sid over after the victory, but just as the crew leaves, Malegi shares one last piece of caution to the team that while they are loyal to Sid, Sid may not return the favor, probably setting up a bit of conflict between the Bad Batch and Sid later down the line. And this small piece of warning will likely manifest itself once the Empire gets closer to the team and in turn Sid, who may very well give up the team in exchange for her life. But I do really think that this is unlikely, and this suspicion of her possibly being a disloyal person will probably not last very long. And so that more or less concludes the breakdown for episode 4 of The Bad Batch. Now, while this was more of a filler episode, there were some pretty important character moments for both Tech and Sid, and tidbits of information that will likely have major consequences down the line. Anyways, that's all for this video. Be sure to like and subscribe and let me know what you think in the comments down below. I will see you in the next one. I'm the Lost Acolyte,
and I have spoken.